everybody. This is Jeremy Martin from Cinco.medicos, and in this video we'll be discussing the Sacral Chakra. And unlike the last series of videos, I'm going to combine all three levels, the individual, the group or organization, business level, and the planetary or society level into just one video so we can see how each connects and relates to one another, and to save me a little bit of time. Now, one throat clearing preamble is that in these videos, nothing is really meant to be taken literally as dogma. I'm using the chakras as a conceptual framework for healing, for helping you to understand yourself better so you can live a more balanced life. And so whatever you find valuable, take what resonates, integrate it into your life, and whatever you don't feel resonates, feel free to just throw away. All this is my perspective and my truth. It's not the absolute truth. So now, since the sacral chakra has to do with vital energy and sensations and emotions, I just want to take a few deep breaths with everybody so we can relax and feel ourselves fully present and embody today's lesson. So everybody just take a deep inhale through the nose. And exhale through the mouth. Inhale through the nose. And exhale through the mouth. Now, in Sanskrit, the name for the sacral chakra is Svadihsthana, which means where your being is established. And because it has so much to do with our deepest biological, emotional, and spiritual strivings, not just erotic energy, but also our spiritual libido, our deepest dreams, our fantasies, our passions, our aspirations, and literally our inspirations. So that's why I began with deep inhalations. We are feeling inspired and we aspire to certain things when we feel that passionate energy. In her book, The Ethics of Caring, Kalia Taylor calls this center sex, and that is why I connect it to human resources on the group level of individuals, like businesses and organizations where that's concerned, because it has to do with how magnetic we find others and how attracted or attractive we are to someone or something, and how charismatic we might be or find someone else, and why it could be equated with culture on the third planetary level when we look at social systems. The sacral chakra on the individual level is usually related with things like pleasure, sensation, emotions, sensuality, and therefore has a lot to do with matters of intimacy with both ourselves, how well we know ourselves, and with others, how well we know others, interpersonal intimacy. And so it really makes sense why the sacral chakra is also related to giving and receiving pleasure, and not just physically, but spiritually as well. And that the level of balanced energy here can help determine how healthy or unhealthy our relationships will be, both with ourselves and with other people. And in some ways, it's also affiliated with creativity and unstructured expression, because it's so tied to the emotions and sensation that with communicating both verbally and non-verbally, there is much more to life than just matter, we realize with this center. So when energy moves intensely through the center, or it's blocked or unbalanced, we tend to see people experience what is commonly known as an existential crisis, where people go pretty crazy. And it also has to do with any type of, like what we saw with the root chakra, change or exchange, anything that waxes or wanes, more with non-permanence, as well as our inner child. Now, the shadows that are associated with this energy center typically have to do with a lot of guilt, with secrets, fear of judgment, of perhaps getting into trouble or being found out, with repression, with the inability to experience the emotional or sexual intimacy that I talked about. And usually that can manifest as nightmares, as not remembering or understanding our dreams, but a lot of guilt typically. And the fears associated with this center have to do with the fear of the transformative energy that is within this center, the fear of touching, perhaps, on an intimate level. And that could also be non-verbally, feeling like someone touched you, as in art. Um, or fear of sexual contact, the fear of others' sexual energy and not being able to handle it. We may find other people's passions threatening or avoid certain relationships because we fear we could lose control or be overcome by the other person to make a mistake like cheating on our spouse or going behind a friend's back. And this could have something to do with core traumas related to touch and contact. So if we were not appropriately touched or shown compassion, or we rarely felt love from a young age, there could be a trauma of omission. And so, even if we are experiencing appropriate touch in our adult lives, this could make us feel afraid or unwilling to touch someone else or be touched by another person, physically or non physically. Now, contact and connection might feel confusing to us if this is one of our shadows or if this is one of our core traumas. It could be as simple as not knowing how to give or receive a real hug. I've met many people who feel very uncomfortable hugging, and when hugging is a very social thing to do to express intimacy between human beings. And for a long time, my own traumas in this center kept me from maintaining prolonged eye contact. I would feel very uncomfortable relating and feeling the intimacy, the windows of someone else's soul, by allowing myself to be intimate and show myself to another, and to allow that change or exchange to happen through the eyes. Now, for a lack of contact and connection, perhaps, that happened early on, that's how it manifests for me. But it could manifest as also being clingy or very needy and fearing another person's absence or a lack of intimacy. So we become almost vampirically trying to suck the life force out of someone else or some other person, because we never really learned to develop or relate to and handle that vital energy when we were growing up or developing ourselves. So maybe we weren't nurtured, and so nurture later on feels foreign, alien, uncomfortable, and basically threatening to us. And perhaps we feel alone a lot of the times, and that has to do with intimacy with ourselves, with feeling like we know and love ourselves and we're our best friends. Or it could present as social anxiety, a fear of intimacy with others and feeling uncomfortable in a group setting. And I can personally attest to many years of feeling social anxiety until I started to clear a lot of the blockages and limitations in the center myself. This could also translate into certain desires and longings. Desires and longings in this center tend to have to do with a constant need for interaction, which have to do a lot with the fear, as I mentioned in the last part, where we fear someone else's absence. And so we desire a constant need for that interaction. We really long for regenerative energy, a longing for physical expression and connection, a desire for physical touch, sexual contact, but just in general, a need to be close. And we feel like we can't be close, perhaps because we're not getting this energy within ourselves, and so we look for it outside of ourselves. Individuals who are in a profound process involving the sacral chakra often experience their bodies as holy objects. They use their bodies as worships, temples of worship. They feel really a glorious gift of the sensuality of life and very attracted to the physical bodies of others. You've probably met people like this who are just so juicy, um, and they act very juicy. I'm not sure if I'm getting this idea across, but they really are inspired by the power that they have within, and not just of sex, but the transformation that union with themselves, union with spirit, and union with others can promise. And so it's important to note that the sacral chakra is much more than physical lust. It's really more akin to alchemy, to fantasy and transcendence, to using our imagination to create other realities. And we'll see this with regards to culture and art, and on a societal level, how we create other realities through culture and through art, by transcending a certain reality and creating another one. And so this has a lot to do with um, the power of total expression. And so many artists also aspire to this dissolution of self and a union with God, or a union with something greater. Maybe it's, for the artist, the muse. And so when looking at people who have a lot of power in this center, we tend to see that even people who have excellent boundaries or no conscious intention of hooking up sometimes end up succumbing to the seduction of others in this center. So maybe even to the surprise and their own dismay of themselves or the other person. As with a teacher or student or coach and athlete, it can be much more than a physical fling that we're talking about, or that they're desiring here, but really the experience of an intense spiritual, divine nature that each person has longed for and desired so much that they just can't resist it, and oftentimes feel deeply embarrassed or angry about when it happens, such as with a therapist feeling desire for a client. This happens a lot in therapeutic settings, where people feel very surprised. They have so much training, and yet they really can't contain that energy. It's too much for them to handle. Now, we were talking about traumas related to the center, but more specifically, as you might expect, sexual or emotional abuse, denial of pleasure, denial of attraction, really denial of feeling states ranging from neglect to perhaps religious restriction, as well as enmeshment with another person. Sometimes this might be exploitation, not feeling safe, the lack of touch that I was talking about earlier, the omission of care, the omission of appropriate or compassionate, loving contact. In many cases, it really comes down to the denial of feeling. I'm feeling this, and perhaps a caregiver or an authority figure like a teacher says it's not okay to feel that way. And we'll see this on a group level when we talk about schools and education. But many times it's not appropriate for students to express how they feel. They are there to learn what someone else has to say. And this can oftentimes play itself out in the home as we're developing. So it has a lot to do, in terms of trauma, with the denial and repression of a powerful energy that we all have within ourselves. And that's what leads to a lot of the romantic, physical, and sexual blunders that people make, or the uncomfortable feeling when it comes to sex or feeling close with someone else. Now, some signs that a person might present is rigidity in body movement. If you feel like you've been denied the ability to express yourself, then you might feel physically like very rigid, or you might have either excessive or deficient boundaries in certain areas. There might be a lot of sexual acting out, promiscuity, maybe hysteria. Sometimes bipolar mood swings are associated with this, because our emotions just take us over. It's either a lack of desire or passion, or an excess of passion and not being able to handle that passion. Sometimes this could be manifest in a lack of flexibility in the hips, especially with men not being able to feel their emotions. Culturally speaking, it has been seen as not socially acceptable for men to express or feel certain emotions, and that can manifest closer to the hips, where this chakra is located. The sacral chakra is believed to be located below the navel or around the navel, where the perineum is. And so, on a physical level, it has a lot to do with the reproductive organs, with the spleen, the urinary tract. So, if you have menstrual issues or sexual dysfunction, maybe lower back pain, sometimes even knee trouble, or a loss of appetite for food or sex or passion or art, then you might have some issues in this center. Now, some healing beliefs, I said in the last video that I want to make these videos hopeful and healing to people. Some healing beliefs around this is to say and affirm that I deserve pleasure. Sex is sacred. I embrace my sexuality, my sensuality, my senses. I move easily and effortlessly. I am creative and joyful. I honor my desires. I don't repress them. I honor them. I'm playful and spontaneous. I really just enjoy and deserve to enjoy life. So, when we're thinking about how to heal this center, those are some attitudes or core beliefs that can help us to better guide that energy center. And some questions to consider when we're thinking about ourselves on the individual level is really, what or who am I attracted to? Do I like, dislike? Do I need or not need others' adoration? Do I need pleasure from other people? Can I cultivate that within myself? Really, how much contact or intimacy do I allow in my life? Do I shut other people out? Do I shut myself out from sharing my expressions or my emotions with other people? Um, how long does it take to feel close to someone else? Does it take a long time to trust someone? How close am I with myself? How well do I know myself truly? In healing work, sometimes I've heard people say, I don't even know who I am. And this is really them starting to open up to the power of the center of intimacy with themselves and starting to realize that there's for a long time been a denial of feeling states, a denial of knowing themselves intimately. And another question is, do I feel uncomfortable with sex or even when people talk about sex? Can I talk comfortably about my own feelings, such as in therapy or with a close friend? Do perhaps I judge other people's aspirations, their dreams, their fantasies, their imagination? How easily do I embrace or deny transformation? And how well do I handle strong emotions when they come up? Am I overcome by them, or can I breathe through them? Can I embrace them? Can I move easily and effortlessly with them? Now, as I'm combining all of the individual aspects of the sacral chakra with groups, we're moving on more to a business organizational manifestation of how this can play out in groups of individuals. Now, on a business level, I would relate this chakra to the human resources department in a company, for example, maybe people, operations, anything that's concerned with cultivating relationships. For example, the human resources department is known for recruiting talent, for finding new opportunities, for a lot of hiring and training, a lot of compensating and supporting new employees, really ensuring that the employees that are there are able to learn and to grow and to feel fed and nourished, but also reviewing resumes and how people express who they are on an outside level, with interviewing, with keeping track of employee information, performance management, employee engagement, orientation, sometimes helping families to get ready for parental leave. So it has a lot to do with intimacy. It has a lot to do with creating a culture where people are proud to be themselves. They feel comfortable being themselves at an organization, in a group. So it could also have to do with, on a non-business level, just creating a safe space, a person-led resource group rather than a top-down hierarchical group. It could have to do with organizing events where people feel involved, or partnering opportunities. Really, these are the teams that solve for employee or personal happiness every step of the way. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on the group level because I actually have a lot to say about the societal manifestation of this chakra as it relates to culture. So, in the root chakra that we saw in the last several videos, we talked about agriculture, that which sustains and nourishes us and makes us feel safe and stable. And that on the group level was sales and revenue and things that provide us the ability to survive and to feel fed and secure and safe. But on the sacral chakra level, on a societal planetary scale, this center really deals with emotion and the body, as I talked about individually, and this manifests as culture. Therefore, it's the system that deals most with emotion in music, in dance, yoga, sculpture, cooking, clothing, how people dress, the paintings or murals you might see on the street, the literature that a culture such as Russian literature versus American literature or French literature, the fine arts, a lot of the architecture that has to do with a culture, right? The architecture that was medieval is very different than the architecture that we have today. It has to do with design and philosophy. Everything that deals with emotion and creativity that's related to culture and sensations, and whose forms and expressions always change and are really best encapsulated by the cultural system, which is always transforming itself, because this center has a lot to do with transformative energy, spiritual energy, growing and dying and being tilled, kind of like a culture. So, largely speaking, we could ask, what role does culture play in society? First, we really need to understand, I think, to pan out and understand the principles of creation. Now, I credited the Arsayan Foundation for their influence with agriculture, and I'll do the same thing here. They talked a lot in their videos, which are in Spanish, and I'm transcribing a little bit here about the principles of creation as being a triad, the Holy Trinity, where sound or frequency, light or energy, and form or matter make up that Holy Trinity. This is really everything that exists in creation. And sound came first. We could say that at the beginning, there was sound. In many cultures, we see this as the sound Om, right? And in Christianity, it was the Word. The Word became flesh. God said the Word. But this is really sound. Sound came first, and so maybe we can ask, what do we really mean by sound? We're really talking about frequency, which, and I promise all this relates to culture, which as it moved through the universe created energy, which is light or divinity. And that energy gave rise to geometric form, which is matter, atoms, molecules, DNA, and everything that was created as a result of the convergence between frequency, sound, and energy, light, which created matter. And so the way religion explains this concept, or used to explain this concept as the Holy Trinity, maybe it's the Father, the Mother, the Child, the Father, the Mother, the Holy Ghost. Then there's the Holy Spirit, but that's another topic entirely. The point is, when the singularity expressed polarity, dividing itself into positive and negative, which became vibration or frequency, and which upon moving itself generated energy or light, which then led to geometric patterns known as form or matter in the form of atoms, molecules, and DNA, and so on, to galaxies and greater. The relevance to culture is that the universe is expressing itself in different geometries, just as culture and art do. And so that is the basis, the creative basis for culture, in which geometries, forms, or matter changes all the time and seeks to express an internal reality externally. This is exactly what art and culture does, and this is exactly what the sacral chakra does. As we talked about earlier, too, the sacral chakra is related to sexual energy, which is itself very creative, very spiritual, very generative energy. It is really spirit moving in the body or matter, um, vibrating as frequency and energy. And the body has sensations and emotions which move and express themselves in light, sound, and matter, such as when we sing. Sexual energy is producing and reproducing energy in different forms, regenerative and transformative in nature. And this is why it's so connected to the arts and corresponds to culture, really whose behavior and norms, whose material actions are always changing, coming and going, coming up with new ways to transform what's inside in the formless on the outside in form, in art. So we can talk more broadly and say that to have a culture is to inhabit a place sufficiently intensely to cultivate it, to be responsible for it, to respond to its needs, to attend to it caringly. So all of this connects to the traumas and science that I was talking about on the individual level, except we see it manifest on a group level. When a culture, we'll take American culture for example, begins to, shall we say, disintegrate and die, as we're seeing a lot right now, we could say that it's due to a lack of caring and tilling, to a lack of that internal transformative energy expressing itself. And the big point here is that in any culture, every being must cultivate him or herself individually, that is, to develop, to tend and take care of, and to know and to make fertile within first. And when this is done on an individual level, it can then take collective form and thrive collectively. What each individual cultivates inside is then expressed outside collectively as the whole culture. So think of ourselves as maybe a bacterial culture, right, in a petri dish where there are many cells. And in our case, we're the bacteria, and the earth is the culture or petri dish as a sphere. And so we as cells, if we as beings stop developing, if we stop evolving, growing, transforming, if the individual cells or beings begin to wither and die, then cell by cell, the culture dies. And when the individuals cultivate nothing, then the collective is no longer a culture. And this can sometimes give rise to a new culture to take form because the old one is dying off. We could also see it as a natural process of evolution, like in the video I did about agriculture, right? Every season, the plants die and go to seed, and then they are fodder for the next season. When a new culture emerges and grows very quickly, it is bound to dominate the old one. Kind of like when an old tree falls in a forest, maybe it starts losing a lot of branches at storm after storm, and it's just really weathered, and then a new tree shoots up and blocks out all the light. This forest analogy, I feel like, works pretty perfectly because the old tree becomes soil for the next tree. And so when one culture dies, the vestigial compost of that culture feeds the next one. And just to give you an example, maybe we could move to South America, where we see the mestizo population. Mestizo in Spanish means mixed or mixture, and that's because ancient indigenous cultures, centuries and millennia prior, eventually started to fall apart when the conquistadors from Spain arrived and from Europe arrived, and their culture kind of shaded out and colonized the old cultures, literally chopped their trees down. And eventually the prevailing culture became very syncretic, religiously, philosophically, but it combined many of the old arts the old medicines, the music, the cosmovisions, a lot of their pagan gods, together with the gods or religious outlook of Christianity, and also with more modern industrialized living and economic views of how to live life. And so that's what we see in mestizo culture today. Now, we'll return a little bit to the idea of sound, light, and matter, because within this creation, within this Trinity pattern, we have the foundations of the universe and of culture. And so, because everything in the universe is made up of matter, energy, and frequency waves, this is what allows, on a broader scale, for galaxies to exist, for planets, such as planet Earth, to exist, and everything we know to atoms and the most mundane things. At a galactic or universal level, these three things are really what allowed our very being to start experiencing itself little by little. So it helps to explain why we feel the innate desire as a species to express who we are. What I mean by this is that the universe first experienced its own frequency, its own energy, and finally its own matter. And then it became matter expressing frequency and energy. So it would start to transcend one reality to create new realities, and then when it reached matter or form, that reality would evolve and experience itself so much from so many different perspectives, as we see in art and culture, that it eventually became aware enough to take conscious action by constructing and deconstructing, by creating patterns out of the patterns that it created. And so a lot of this universal theory about the creation of the universe has a lot to do with the way that cultures arise and die and how they regenerate. And in our social and cultural constructions, this could have a lot to do with, on the material plane, architecture, the arts, design, painting, like I was talking about. It has to do with an expression of an internal reality through different forms and geometries. I am expressing from the universe through me. So, what we're really doing when we express ourselves artistically, culturally, what we're doing here is we're creating, constructing, destroying, creating, constructing, transforming, transcending. And why are we doing this? Well, because each person is a universal seed from the tree of life, like we talked about in the last video, and in the root chakra video about agriculture. And each seed is trying to bring together all of the different potentials in a single place. We could say that's planet Earth for our species. And so the more art and expression there is, whether that's through speech, such as this video, or consciousness, through action, the more we're going to be able to create within the universe, the more potential we're going to be able to create on our planet. And therefore, we'll be able to unify our path towards a more spiritual transcendence and to balance the sacral chakra energy. Now, you might be wondering, man, that was a lot. Like, what's the whole point of all of this? I would say, again, as I gave a disclaimer at the beginning of this video, this is just my truth. This is my own perspective. But the purpose of culture in this, especially more macroscopic, cosmic, or planetary social systems view, is to activate the potential within each seed and therefore unify all the potentials of the universe to create a new one, to return once again to the divinity that everybody longs for. And I mentioned in the individual manifestation of this chakra, a lot of people have a longing for spiritual union, a longing or desire for something bigger than themselves. And this all connects to the potentials of the universe trying to create a new one, but to also merge itself with itself. So, in other words, culture goes far beyond just plain history or social development. Yeah, it has a lot to do with that, but it even transcends what we think of as the soul, which is the foundation of the spirit. It has to do with the spirit itself, with frequency, with trying to create a new reality, to create something new and to express this inner potential, so that the more that you deeply connect with yourself, getting back to intimacy, the more that you know thyself and connect with this purpose within, the more you're activating the internal seed that you have within, the more unified with yourself we become, or you become, and the more unified with others we become. And the more that desire or longing for transcendence and for union with God is allowed to manifest and to be found through creative, feeling, emotional expression. Now, because in the universe and reality, it's just all continuous creation, that's why we see continuous art, continuous expression, and thus continuous culture. So, some of my own personal advice or recommendations about how to develop this energy center, just from my own experiences, the more singing you do. I didn't ever think that I was a singer or had that capacity. I was a musician, I was a drummer, but really the more singing or just music that you play, the better able you're going to be able to find your own voice. The more you're going to be able to channel this frequency from a very deep level, near the navel, the umbilical cord, the where the being is established, which is the Sanskrit definition, the more this purpose that I mentioned is accomplished, and will create a new culture, because you're cultivating yourself, and the more people who do this, the more culture is able to thrive or be recreated, and then balance our planet's sacral chakra. So um, maybe I could just tie this with what I was saying about sound. Our voice is sound, singing is sound. Remember that the first universal existence was the word or sound or frequency. So anything that we want to transform in our lives or in our reality, maybe that's in our family or in our lifestyle or in our business, anything that we want to change, the first way to transform things is through frequency, through vibration, which could be through the word or through singing or humming or any kind of chanting, by maybe perhaps saying what we feel. If there's been a denial of feeling states or a repression of what we think and want to express, then we need to express what we have inside. We need to release the things that we have stuck in our throats. Um, and and so in many ways, this center also relates to the throat chakra, which we'll talk about in later videos. But the basic idea is, if we can't release this frequency that's blocked, then we won't be able to have clarity in what we are experiencing. We'll feel very lost or confused. We'll feel kind of unbalanced as individuals, as groups, and as a society, because we're also repressed, and we won't be able to change our reality, which I think a lot of people want right now. They deeply desire a change, and this is how we do it. This is why it's so important for us to learn how to express what we hold inside, which isn't just saying what we feel or about speaking the truth. It's certainly that, but it's about also releasing the sounds that we have inside. We might be holding a lot of anger, and so maybe we need to express angry sounds, like a primal scream, or anxious sounds. Maybe it's a joyous sound. Maybe it's an expressive cry. And, we've all had a good cry. And it feels so therapeutic, and so balancing. So, really, any sound or frequency, anything that enables us to generate that clarity. For example, right now I'm feeling, right? So just whatever it is that you're feeling, apply this to your own life, and by expressing that, I'm transforming something that was stuck inside, and I'm expressing it, and so it's really spirit moving through matter. So I would recommend anybody who feels called. I feel like everybody has that inner singer or inner voice inside to express. Learning how to sing. Maybe start in the shower. Maybe start by humming a little bit, just to yourself on a walk. Now, I'm not saying that you need to sing in a choir. You can just find your own sound, your own tone, and express it the way you need to express it. Cultivate that within yourself so that our culture can do that on a collective level. And eventually what you'll come to notice that the more that you're able to express your own inner sounds, it will become much easier to express your truth and to express what you feel naturally. You won't have to try to do this as an exercise that just feels like pulling teeth. Um, and the more you'll be able to transform whatever reality that you have in your life, um, because everything starts from sound. That's why we have, that's why we see language, song, music as the fundamental basis to almost every culture. And when we were tribes, we sang, we spoke, we told stories, we expressed ourselves, and the more we express ourselves, the more that we're going to be able to change our thoughts as a result, and to start to look for new tools and techniques to do what we want to do and to change our perspective of the present and perhaps of the future. Otherwise, the seeds just remain seeds. They're not unlocking that inner potential. They don't express themselves from where the being starts, the umbilical cord, the navel, and it's like a plant never flowering or never fruiting, never really showing its true shape and size. The more we express ourselves through sound, the more we express ourselves through light and matter, in painting, architectural design, in sculpture, whatever. Maybe it's basket weaving, it doesn't matter. Anything physical that is the product of your words, your thoughts, and your inner being. And so, in this way, you are bringing your own spirit into the world of form, and you're beginning to integrate it in the world of form to create a new kind of tree of life here on Earth. And this is why, to wrap things up, why culture means to cultivate the seed that we've carried within since the beginning. When the seed fell from the tree of life, from the fruit of that tree that we call the universe, it generated this potential within each of us that we need to cultivate as individuals and as a planet so that we can do our part. Now, maybe you're wondering at this point, like if you're not exhausted by all that talking, is can't culture be also used as a tool to both prohibit or block that creative expression? Haven't we seen this throughout history? And you're right. I mean, in many ways, culture has turned into a national philosophy. In a lot of schools, I was mentioning before, students feel like they can't express themselves in class as they'd like to. And maybe that's just in general in life as adults at work. But the school, from a young age has a lot of rules for people who want to express themselves, and saying, well, you can express these certain things, but you can't express that. And a lot of students are typically punished, or maybe they're ostracized by their social group for expressing what they have inside. But also the way classes are taught, the way work is sort of like a factory. We are really there to sit down, to be quiet, to listen to what the teacher has to say, and to just learn the lessons and to do well on our exams so that we can function in society. And that's not expressing yourself. That is taking what's outside and putting it inside. Really, it's not cultivating your own seed. It's quite the opposite. So in life, I've heard it said that you first have the test and then you learn the lesson. And in school, we could say the opposite. You have the lesson, and then you have the test. So in life, really to pass the test of life, we need to express ourselves. We need to experiment, make mistakes, get lost and confused a little bit, not be afraid of getting lost and confused a little bit. All this helps you to unlearn and free yourself from the social conditioning that says you have to do things right, you have to do things this way, you have to do what adults or other people say or tell you to do. You have to do what the state says, and you have to do what the world tells you to do. And maybe if I go out in public and express myself, people are going to judge me and I'm going to feel bad. All of this is really nonsense. This is programming, this is conditioning that can be unlearned slowly, and that's a process within itself. It's a cultural pattern that we have had for a long time that has tended to block personal expression, which tends to lead to the death of a culture, both within the individual and on the broader scale, because we're afraid to say what we think, and therefore we block our artistic or entrepreneurial side because we are afraid of being judged when we express what we have inside. I mean, do you think I'm not really afraid to publish these videos or say what I think? Of course I am. But I know I have to do it. The only way to express myself without fear is to express myself without fear. The only way to shift our perspective of reality as a culture is to share our perspective, not to parrot or to ape what other people think or feel. It's for us to express what's inside ourselves and to create and to transform and to keep doing that continuously so that culture can develop. And this is not something that can be taught or learned in school. The being yourself must understand his or herself and express that understanding. I can't teach you how to understand yourself. Only you can understand yourself. Only you can know thyself. And so you can't learn about yourself from me. You can learn about yourself by seeing how I've learned about myself or understood myself, really. And so this is why culture has nothing to do with standard education, which we'll talk about in more detail when we get to the throat chakra. That's why these chakras are very interrelated. Culture is something that the being develops from within. It's not the normal day-to-day learning process that we see in most public schools or in modern day offices. It is the understanding process rather than the learning process. It's very personal. It doesn't come from outside. It comes from within, that I have to cultivate actively. And, we've all heard the quote, we don't know who said it, but I've never let schooling interfere with my education. That's really saying that there is a difference between learning from others and understanding oneself by living life, by expressing yourself and knowing yourself. And that's what that means, at least to me. And it gets back to what we were talking about earlier when we opened with the issues related to the sacral chakra, with intimacy, with closeness, touching, sensuality, emotions. The more you know yourself, the closer you are to who you are. And the more you feel and sense and honor your own pleasure, your own desires, your own dreams, and the more balanced a being you'll be. Anyway, that's more or less a summary of the sacral chakra, how it manifests in human relationships, and why art and culture exists. Basically, we're the earth knowing itself and expressing itself. We come from the tree of life, the universe, where each seeds expressing the golden potential that's inside each seed, each transforming that potential. So get out there, be somebody, create, transform, make art, share it with people, share your voice, sing, transform reality. Like, subscribe. Goodbye.